The word crisis is used very often in football. Some would argue that it's used too often, but there are certain times when it's the only suitable word to describe a club's situation. And currently that's the case with Premier League club Chelsea. Chelsea are in a crisis, the kind of which hasn't been seen before in European football. The club is enduring its worst form on the pitch in 3 decades, accompanied by lots of uncertainty and unrest in the stands. Anyone with even a mild interest in football knows Chelsea is synonymous with winning. With over 25 trophies since the turn of the century, they are one of the giants of the European game. But in 2023, they found themselves closer to the bottom of the league table than the top, and with more losses than wins all year. So what has gone wrong for the once formidable Blues? The exact origin of Chelsea's current problems divides opinion. Some fans and pundits believe cracks have been showing for years, with the club's last league title coming as far back as 2017. And it's true, Chelsea haven't been the best team in England for the better part of a decade, but even then, they continued to win the big trophies. Most notably the Champions League in 2021. In 2022, however, the cracks would turn into gaping holes. In February 2022, Roman Abramovich announced his decision to sell Chelsea following Russia's invasion of Ukraine and his assets seized by the British government. The Russian oligarch had owned Chelsea for 19 years, turning the club into one of the most successful sporting projects on the planet. But it was time to hand over the reins in West London to new owners. Being a huge club in one of the world's biggest cities, there was no shortage of suitors for Chelsea. After a dragged-out process, the club was sold to a consortium led by American billionaire Todd Boehly in a deal worth over $4 billion. It's important to note that while the British government weren't fans of Abramovich, he was a hugely popular figure at Chelsea. For Todd Boehly, this posed his first real challenge, winning over the Chelsea fans. You see, Americans aren't very welcome in British sports. They're often accused of being clueless and not understanding the culture of British football, a stigma that's been around for nearly a century. These fears among Chelsea fans weren't helped by other American owners within the British game, most famously the Glazer family, owners of Manchester United, who have overseen the club's slow decline over the last 10 years, and are often on the receiving end of fan protests at Old Trafford. But something seemed different about Todd Boehly, and concerns of Americans having tight pockets were quickly dashed aside once the transfer window opened in the summer. Just 13 days into the window, Boehly splashed the cash on Man City winger Raheem Sterling in a deal worth around $57 million. Just a few days after that, one of Serie A's best defenders, Kalidou Koulibaly, would be signed for $40 million. Big money deals would follow for left-back Marc Cucurella and centre-back Wesley Fofana, as well as the signings of Gabriel Slonina, Carney Chukwuemeka, and Denis Zakaria. In total, Chelsea spent around $285 million on new signings, the most of any team in the summer window. While the fans were delighted, things weren't all rosy behind the scenes. Chelsea had been working mainly without a sporting director following the departure of previous club director Marina Granovskaya. This put a lot of pressure on manager Thomas Tuchel to decide who he needs for his squad, and on Todd Boehly to negotiate deals for new players. This put both in unfamiliar territory and, if reports are to be believed, created some discord between the parties. Thomas Tuchel would rather focus on coaching the team, while Todd Boehly wanted a manager more open to communication. And as a result, Thomas Tuchel was sacked as Chelsea boss just days after the transfer window had closed. But it was still a shock to the footballing world, as just a year before he had won Chelsea the Champions League and was a fan favourite at Stamford Bridge. This sacking, however, created a much deeper problem at Chelsea, one many believe to be the source of Chelsea's struggles in the 2022-2023 season. Chelsea had spent nearly $300 million on players requested by Thomas Tuchel. The squad was his and shaped in his vision. New signing Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang came to the club mainly to play under his former boss, but he was gone just days later. A bizarre situation that put the next manager under pressure immediately. To replace the now departed Tuchel, Chelsea's new owners set their sights on Brighton head coach Graham Potter. Potter was by no means a bad appointment. He had Brighton regularly competing with the very best teams in England and was known as one of the most flexible tacticians in the league. It was only a matter of time before he was hired by one of the big clubs, and this was seen as Chelsea beating the others to his signature. For Potter, this was his biggest job to date. He had a larger squad, bigger egos, and higher expectations to handle than he was accustomed to. And with an unbalanced, albeit expensive squad shaped by a different manager, some would say he was fighting a losing battle from the start. Potter's first few months at Chelsea were average at best. There were some highlights, like wins in both Champions League games against AC Milan, at home to Wolves, and finishing top of their Champions League group. But there were also a lot of bad results leading up to the World Cup break, including a 4-1 loss away to Brighton and defeats against Arsenal and Newcastle. However, there was optimism that with a 6-week break for the World Cup, Potter and his staff would get some much-needed time to put the house in order. But just after the World Cup, the January transfer window opened and the chaos at Chelsea resumed. January 2023 was an eventful month at Chelsea, to say the least. In football, the winter transfer window is often fairly inactive and is seen as a chance to shore up the squad in case of injuries. Traditionally, clubs spend very little, with most of the funds preserved for the summer. But clearly no one told Todd Boehly this. Just days into the window, the first winter signing was announced, with Monaco centre-back Benoit Badiashile moving from France to London. Chelsea would also add David Datro Fofana and Andre Santos to an already bloated squad now in excess of 30 players. But the craziness was just starting. In mid-January, Chelsea hijacked Arsenal's move for Ukrainian forward Mikhailo Mudryk in a deal potentially worth over $100 million. Yet another winger in PSV's Noni Madueke would also join the club in January, as well as Portuguese star João Felix, on a loan deal worth around $13 million. This brought Chelsea's total spend in January to over $200 million, a figure that's never been reached by any club in a winter window before. And still, Todd Boehly wasn't done, as he saved the craziest deal of the window for last. After a dramatic negotiation, Chelsea sealed a deal for Argentine midfielder Enzo Fernandez, just minutes before the deadline. The midfielder won the World Cup with Argentina and was one of the highest rated youngsters in football. In total, Chelsea spent approximately $340 million in January and brought their total spending under Todd Boehly to $600 million in just 2 windows. No one had ever spent money like this in the history of the game. Chelsea faced lots of criticism for their excessive spending from pundits and fans of rival clubs. They were accused of challenging the integrity of the game and buying their way to success. In reality though, there was a lot of buying and very little success, at least not on the pitch. After spending over $500 million on new players to improve the squad, Chelsea climbing up the league table was supposed to be a formality, but it just didn't happen. Chelsea's form at the start of 2023 was abysmal, to put it mildly. The team won just a single one of their first 11 games in the new year, putting manager Graham Potter under immense pressure. It was the worst run of form seen at Stamford Bridge in over half a century, and the amount of investment in the squad made the situation all the more baffling. Why Chelsea was so bad was a question on everyone's lips. According to reports, manager Graham Potter was dealing with a bloated squad containing well over 30 players, at least 10 more than the league average. Some players reportedly didn't have a locker in the dressing room due to the large size of the squad, and the manager found it hard to have productive training sessions while dealing with so many players and egos at once. But this was just one theory, and there were countless of them. There was a momentary reprieve for Potter following 3 straight wins in March, including a comeback win against German giants Borussia Dortmund to take Chelsea into the quarter-finals of the Champions League. But his joy was short-lived. On the 1st of May 2023, Chelsea lost 2-0 at home to Aston Villa in what would be Potter's last game as manager. What went wrong for Potter at Chelsea is up to each person's interpretation. One of the best young managers in the game coaching a team of young and talented players in theory should be a success, but it wasn't. And Boehly's big decision to sack Thomas Tuchel and replace him with a less experienced manager had backfired. Chelsea, though, still had a season to save, with mild fears of relegation and the small matter of a Champions League tie against Real Madrid on the horizon. Club legend and former manager Frank Lampard was brought in to keep the ship afloat for the rest of the season. But what followed was defeat, and more defeat. Chelsea lost the Champions League tie to Real Madrid 4-0 on aggregate, amidst heavy losses in the Premier League, including a 3-1 defeat to Arsenal and a 4-1 defeat lost to Manchester United. Chelsea ended the season in 12th place, their worst ever finish in the Premier League, but when the final whistle was blown on the 28th of May, there was a sense of relief above all else at Stamford Bridge. A torrid season was finally over. Chelsea had set a plethora of negative records throughout the season, such as their worst home record least goals scored, and lowest points tally for a season. But in football, there's rarely time to lick wounds. A new season was on the horizon, and it was time to look to the future. Chelsea turned to Argentine coach Mauricio Pochettino to lead the club forward. But first, it was important old mistakes weren't repeated. To many Chelsea fans, Todd Boehly's heart is in the right place. He committed more money to the club already than most owners do in a decade. But there's a saying that too much of anything is bad, and maybe that's where Chelsea's primary problem lay in the 22-23 season. The club signed 24 players in 6 months, and got rid of a further 21. For a majority of clubs, this level of player turnover happens over the span of 4 to 5 years. So in theory, while Todd Boehly improved the Chelsea squad, integrating that many players at once created a problem instead of providing a solution. Money can buy you players, but can't buy you a cohesive team, and that's always been the case in football. In truth, his decision to get rid of Thomas Tuchel was perhaps a hasty one. Graham Potter, while a brilliant coach, has a history of requiring time and patience to deliver results. And with all the new big money signings, and the expectations at Chelsea, those luxuries couldn't be afforded to him in West London. And by the time Frank Lampard was hired in March, he had won just 3 of 16 Premier League games prior to being sacked from his previous club, Everton. So maybe Chelsea's ordeal isn't as complicated as it seems, just a bunch of poor decisions producing poor results. What's clear, however, is that the situation needs to change sooner rather than later. Chelsea feels like a club banking on time, hoping that this is a transitional period and, in a couple of years, their young squad will develop into a formidable outfit. But with expensive players on long-term contracts and a £1 billion squad, if they don't start being more successful on the pitch, it will inevitably result in financial problems for the club. Under Pochettino, Chelsea are seeking a reset on and off the field, the kind they craved when Graham Potter was hired. Whether he can nurture Chelsea's young squad into long-term challengers of Manchester City remains to be seen. But given the money spent so far, there's very little margin for further failure. Is Pochettino the right man to take the Blues back to the glory days? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. Till next time.